The podium, since that's my bag.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Ulrich, Director of NYU Washington, D.C., and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's event, Washington, D.C. Political Host to the World. Our panel tonight is part of a common course for our students to introduce them to D.C. during their semester studying here. We've explored some of the historical and cultural facets of our nation's capital and turn our attention tonight to D.C.'s global importance. Washington, D.C. is home to many important institutions with an international focus, including NGOs, embassies, think tanks, governmental agencies, and relief organizations. Their mission is to effect change in a variety of ways, such as environmental sustainability, economic development, human rights, public health, diplomacy, and more. For this panel, we'll hear from individuals from a few of these institutions as they discuss past successes, current initiatives, and future plans. We'll also explore how different kinds of institutions share strategies and have unique approaches to their work. Thank you tonight to our team members, Tom McIntyre and Gabby Royal, for helping to organize our event, which will include a small reception after our panel discussion. Thank you as well to our moderator, Victoria Kieshel, who will soon introduce our panelists. First, allow me to introduce Vicki to you. Victoria Kieshel has 20 years of professional experience in architecture, education, and sustainable design. A practicing architect, she works for the Cadmus Group, where she focuses on small to medium scale residential and institutional projects. As one example, she designed the library for the Maury Elementary School for Washington, D.C. Capitol Hill School Libraries Project. Vicki is an adjunct faculty member of the Global Environmental Politics program at American University, where she was the inaugural recipient of AU's Most Innovative Green Teacher of the Year Award. More importantly, she has taught with NYU Washington, D.C. since our first semester and generously volunteers her time for our program in countless ways. I am pleased to turn over tonight's event to our moderator, Victoria Kieshel. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Is everyone hearing me well? I feel mic'd, so this is good. So we have three very interesting panelists tonight, representing three very different organizations in Washington, D.C. And I'll introduce them in a minute, but the World Bank, for one, USAID for another, and the IFPRI, which is the International Food and Policy Research Institute, which have very different provenances in terms of their time frame. World Bank, established right after World War II here, just coming off of this massive world war, the need for reconstruction. Certainly then following that, you have about a span of 15-year gap. Then you get USAID, John F. Kennedy, founding that, Cold War era, interesting again. Fast forward again, another 15 years, and you have IFPRI, following on the Green Revolution. Those of you who are my students, maybe others will know what that means, which is really an interesting time in terms of addressing issues like world hunger. So let me introduce our panelists. I'll go one after the other here as they're seated. Sean Maloney, he serves as the Chief of Staff for the Bureau of Africa at USAID. In this capacity, Sean oversees operations of the Bureau's $6.5 billion portfolio, with 23 bilateral missions, 3 regional missions, and projects in 44 countries. Sean makes policy recommendations to the Assistant Administrator and the USAID leadership team with a focus on aligning U.S. government assistance programs in Africa with Obama administration priorities. Previously, Sean served as an advisor in the Office of the Deputy Coordinator for Feed the Future at USAID. In this role, he served as management and policy advisor for President Obama's signature initiative with Feed the Future, which is a $3.5 billion effort to fight the root causes of hunger, poverty, and undernutrition in the developing world. Sean also worked as manager for operation at New York University and graduated from NYU Wagner with a master's degree in nonprofit management with a focus on internal policy in 2008. And for my beloved students from Abu Dhabi, I just learned that he had a hand in the creation of that campus during his time at NYU. Tamara Kane is Special Assistant to the Chief Economist of the Climate Change Group at the World Bank, which I've learned tonight is a fairly new group at the World Bank. In this capacity, Tamara contributes to the team's work on green growth and decision-making under uncertainty, and coordinates the World Bank's contribution to the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, which we'll hear more about tonight. Prior to her current role, Tamara served as research assistant in the Early Recovery, Livelihoods, Poverty Reduction, and MDGs unit, that's Millennium Development Goals unit, my students know that, of UNDP's office in Haiti, providing technical assistance to conditional cash transfer programs, impact evaluations, and the elaboration of a national social protection strategy. She's also worked at the African Development Bank, the Clinton Foundation, and the International Rescue Committee. She holds a master's in international economic policy from Sciences Po in Paris, and a master's in international finance from Columbia University. And I also learned in the green room that she was, in her day, not that long ago, the youngest graduate of NYU. So you were, I think, handed the torch by the oldest faculty member, graduating from NYU when she was 19. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Ephraim, okay, I'm going to do it, Konya.
Yes.
All right.
Well.
He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Ephraim leads an IFRI program on land resources for poverty reduction. He earned his master's and PhD degrees in agricultural economics at Kansas State University from 1992 to 1999, yay KSU, Heartland. He's published widely in reference journals on issues related to natural resource management, poverty reduction, and climate change. Ephraim is a true East African with Tanzanian citizenship and ancestral heritage from Machakos, Kenya, and Mabara, Uganda. Ephraim grew up in rural areas around Lake Victoria in Tanzania, an environment that inspired him to study even more how natural resources that surrounded him during his childhood could be used to reduce poverty. That's poetic, it's beautiful. In collaboration with scientists from around the world, Ephraim is currently leading a global study on the economics of land degradation, which aims to measure the cost of inaction against land degradation and the benefit of talking against land degradation. So with that, I'd like to ask each of you to talk about how you came to Washington. We've heard about your backgrounds, how long you've been with your organizations, and what led you to them. The personal is always a good place to start. So Sean, you want to begin?
Sure, happy to. Hi, I'm Sean. Good to meet you all. I came to Washington now over 5 years ago. I've been at USAID, it'll be 5 years in November, actually. And I came down because I had an opportunity to be a part of the Obama administration, which was really exciting, especially in the foreign policy realm, which, you know, back then we weren't getting dinged on foreign policy. And so it was actually it was very, very, very nice. People were very jealous that I got the job I was able to get. I started off as a special assistant in the Africa Bureau, which is where I am now, and then did a tour starting up the Bureau for Food Security at AID, which was a new bureau being created to handle the president's priority, which was Feed the Future in the development space. And did that for a little over a year, and then we got a new assistant administrator for Africa, and he asked me to come back and be chief of staff, so I said yes, and I've done that for now over 2 years. And so, yeah, it's been 5 years. It's felt like 10, because the politics of development, which is of course still taught at Wagner by John Gershman, is intense. You would think that trying to end poverty would be something people agree about. It is not, and then of course everything comes down to money. So lots of battles to be fought in the world of development, but I've been very proud to help fight those battles and be on what I hope is the winning side. But I ended up down here just because I actually knew the right people. Surprise, surprise. In Washington, that's kind of how things work. Most people work on campaigns before becoming appointees. I just happened to work with somebody at NYU. In fact, well, two people at NYU. So my boss at NYU was Cheryl Mills, who then came down as chief of staff to Hillary Clinton for the State Department. And her boss at NYU was Jack Lew, who's now our Treasury Secretary. So there's actually an NYU mafia helping to run the government here.
Interesting.
And yeah.
And the Clinton connection too.
Exactly,
Very interesting.
right,
Very
right.
interesting.
So that's how I ended up here. My wife actually was also an appointee at the State Department and just left. She came down to work for Jack, actually. And so for 4.5 years, we were a dual appointee household, which around election time is really sort of terrifying because then you'd be out without a job. So luckily Obama won the second term. And there's a couple years left, so I'm not nervous yet. But if you have good job leads, let me know. So yeah, that's how I got here. And we're staying here. My in-laws happen to live here, and so I think we're here for the long haul.
Great. You're practically a native Washingtonian. Very
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Tamara, what is your story? How did you come to the World Bank and to Washington, and how long have you lived here?
I've lived here half my life. So my dad was a military attaché for Senegal. So we moved here when I was 10 years old. So I've lived right outside of DC and sort of, I wouldn't say lived in DC. We all say we live in DC because nobody knows where Bethesda, Maryland is, especially when you're traveling. But once you start working in DC, you realize that you don't know DC, even if you live in the surroundings of DC until you've worked or participated within the community of DC. So I grew up right outside of DC and graduated from Walter Johnson, and then I attended NYU undergrad for 3 years, and then went on to do my master's. After which I worked a bit all over the world, and most of it was operations work, and it was quite interesting, but it was really frustrating because you're driven by money, you're driven by limited resources, and you're implementing. You're not really spending a lot of time thinking about why you're doing what you're doing and why in this particular way. And I was working in Haiti at the time, and it's frustrating to live in a place where so much money has gone, so many different programs are being implemented, and I mean, we're busy all the time. You're working like a Wall Street person because you live where you work, you live your job. So literally, if you're not sleeping, you're practically working at all times. And when you're not, you're living in conditions that are really difficult in that circumstance because you work for the UN, so there are security regulations, and you're constantly being surrounded by AK-47s. And it was just a very difficult thing to be heading into straight out of school as one of your first few jobs, and to not feel committed to necessarily the ways within which we're doing our work.
What year was this, may I ask, when you were in
This
Haiti?
was in 2012. And so I started looking for other opportunities, partly because it was a consultancy, which is unfortunately what you get graduating straight out of school. Almost no one wants to hire students in a staff position starting out. It's got its advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are that you can move around and explore all these opportunities, which I was able to do. So I started looking for other opportunities so that I would have an option when it was time to renew my contract. And I applied to this job at the World Bank because it was in a sustainable development network at the time. I was in the front office with the chief economist. And the way that the job was sold is that you're not only exposed to all of the different sectors that touch upon development, whether it's energy, water, food security, social protection, name it. That's what's great about sustainable development. It encompasses everything that is within the development scope. So it was incredibly interesting, and for me, it was going to provide me a bird's eye view of what I wanted to spend the rest of my life working on. And so I applied to this job, and I got it. I think it's one of the very few competitive process consultancy jobs at the bank. And I have since been at the bank for 2 years now. A year and a half spent within the Sustainable Development Network, and of course my first year here, because you got to keep things interesting, the World Bank decided to go through a restructuration process, and so the department that I came in through Sustainable Development Network was dismantled and is now 15 different departments with each sector has its own group practically.
Oh, that It disappoints me. I think of, the advantages to integration instead of the siloing of these things. Anyway.
Exactly. I think the aim was to be able to dive more deeply and into specific sectors and sort of highlight their importance individually. But I do agree that that is sort of a disadvantage of this, is that it kind of, that's what happens when you dissipate. Whereas we tend to try and push forward these cross-cutting or cross-sectoral projects because they're the most efficient. And unfortunately, this kind of makes that more bureaucratic and difficult. But and so through that, we have not only the groups, but we also have cross-cutting solutions areas, is what they're called at the bank, in poverty and gender, stylized facts. And then one of those is the one that I work in currently, and that's climate change. And
that's interesting. Poverty, gender, and climate change are
Yeah.
three of the cross-cutting
I'm sure there's a fourth.
groups. That's good.
There.
Ephraim, tell us about how you came to IFPRI and to Washington.
Well, I came to IFPRI about 10 years ago. But I was employed by IFPRI in 1999, which is now 15 years. But I went to Uganda before I came back again to US. But you won't understand the story until when I tell you where I came from and why I chose to do what I'm doing right now, which is agricultural economics. I grew up on a farm, 5 acres only, and my mother and my father had 16 kids, 1-6. I'm the 8th. Now, my mother is the best professor of economics I've seen. She taught me how to use time, how to feed 16 kids on a 5-acre farm. Early in the morning at 5, she'll wake me up. I didn't like it. I was very young, and before I go to school, I have got to go to the farm to work before I come and wash my feet, then go to school. Good news is the school was just beyond our house. And then at the end of the school at 5 p.m., the other kids will be going to play soccer, which I loved very much. My mother will be standing right at the border of the playground, and she said, Ephraim, come back, you have to go fetch water from the river. I hated it. Now, all I'm trying to say is that the small farmers in Africa work very hard. But my question is, why do they remain so poor up to now? And that's the reason I chose to do work at IFPRI, because I got 2 positions. One was at IFPRI, another one at Mississippi State University, and in 1999 when I graduated. But when I weighed the 2, I said, well, let me go to IFPRI, because those are the people who are addressing the questions that I had when I grew up in my small village, in my small farm of 5 acres, which fed 16 children. I can tell you one thing, that of all those 16 kids, and to prove that my mother is the best economist I've seen, all of them went to college except 2. I never went to bed hungry. That tells me that, well, those small-scale farmers work very hard. But the big question is, which I'm still addressing at IFPRI, why do they remain so poor? Why they work so hard?
Wow. Interesting, diverse backgrounds here. I mean, you, Tamara, you were very much in the field in Haiti. And you grew up in the field, literally. Yeah. I mean, as part of a farm. And Sean, you were more removed, I take it, from this. But, it's...
I was a Peace Corps volunteer.
There you go. Where were you?
In a rural village in... I was on the border of Benin and Niger, and as Ephraim knows, there are a few countries as poor as Niger in the entire world. So I do know some subsistence farming very well.
It's interesting. What happens in your organizations in terms of... You spoke, I want to get back to this point about the idea that you're implementing all the time. There's no time to think. What is this relationship between what you do as kind of thinkers, conceptualizers of solutions, and then how you have your organizations implement those? Want to start?
Yeah, these are very interesting things. Maybe let's start with the example of Niger, because you're talking about it, and I'm currently, as we speak, doing a research in Niger. Has remained one of the poorest countries on earth for the past 20 years. But this country is turning a corner because the poverty is decreasing very fast. The mortality rate is also decreasing very, very fast. But one thing that has taught me is that it is not because of the handouts that this country receives. It's because it changed its policies. In the long past, during the French colonization, Tamara knows very well this. There was a law which was telling people that all trees belong to the government. You are not supposed to cut them. You are not supposed to use them. That was a discouragement of the farmers to manage their own resources. And there was what they called it the law of the axe that you use to cut the trees. If you clear a forest, that area belongs to you. If you don't clear your farm for 10 years, the government will come and take it away. As a result, all the trees were cleared, and the small farmers and the women in the rural areas would spend one whole day to fetch the firewood to come and cook food. And that was a very heart-wrenching land degradation that happened in Niger. Mm-hmm. Then in the mid-1980s, they passed a law. It is all called a rural code. A rural code, that's a French. She understands very well what I'm talking about. This law was very simple. There wasn't a lot of investment from the government. It was just a law, a change in the law that incentivized farmers to protect trees and to plant trees. Lo and behold, satellite images now are showing greenness in Niger more than the greenness that we see in northern Nigeria. For simple reason, because the farmers were now given what we call a tree tenure, that if you protect a tree in your farm, or if you plant a tree in your farm, that tree belongs to you, the government has nothing to do with it. Mm. And as a result of that, change of a law, no big investment, no big handouts, just an incentive that provided the farmers the incentive to protect those trees. And as a result, because of that, the government laws, the policies, and the institution in the government can make a very big difference in how the farmers behave themselves. As I said in the beginning, give the example of my own family, they work very hard, but the government sometimes messes up things. What we do at IFPRI is to advise the governments. This is the way to go. And we are very much into giving incentives to the farmers, giving them mandate to do things that they feel are best, but you guide them according to the laws and regulations. A study that I referred to there was we were looking at the government effectiveness, looking at how the laws and regulations in the government are, first of all, involving the people, the participatory democracy that we always talk about, and how that affects land management and the economy. And we found that in countries where the government effectiveness has been increasing, including Niger, which I'm giving right now, we found the income is increasing, the mortality rate of children is decreasing, meaning that the base of any development is the government policies and institutions. A country like DRC Congo, the people are starving. The poorest country, one of the poorest countries in the world currently, but 30% of the carbon stock in Africa are sitting in DRC Congo. Why? A country which has a lot of resources starving the policies and the institutions.
So that's an example where you think they need more top-down, more sort of advice or regulation from on high. That's an interesting point. We'll get back to this issue of kind of how you do what you do on the ground. But Tamara, why don't you talk about this issue of this relationship between the sort of conceptualization at a higher level and then what happens when you implement and on the ground and how that connects?
Sure. I'll start by piggybacking on Ephraim, the way that Ephraim highlighted that institutions get it wrong sometimes. So the bank it has its reputation. Everyone has what they think about the World Bank. But I'll give you an example, structural adjustments. So that's something that I grew up with. I'm from Senegal. We were a victim of the SAPs. And we know that, they worked in some countries. For example, in East Asia, structural adjustment programs work very well. It took 230 million people out of poverty just in that region because it worked so well. Whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, it set some countries back years and, led to massive amounts of public debt. And sometimes my accent comes out in the most awkward ways.
Not really. Anyway, go on.
So that's just one example. And what drew me to the bank was actually the way that they combine research and operations, particularly, right? The bank is known as much as being a knowledge bank today as it is known as being, a development organization that lends to infrastructure projects and, contributes to operations at a global scale. On some topics, people would prefer they do not, and others they have a comparative advantage in doing. But I think it's that because they do research, because they're constantly going back and thinking through some of these projects and operations and policies they've already enacted and wondering, why did it work in this instance and why didn't it work in this instance? Maybe that's not the proper way to do it because in the end, we're just looking for guidelines. And if you know anything about the world, you can't put everything in boxes very neatly. And it is precisely for this reason that we constantly should be looking again at what we've done, where it stands, and how to make it better. And I think to kind of counter Ephraim's point that the top-down, that it comes from the government policy works, if you look at the scale that the World Bank works, then you could say that any policy or a recommendation that comes out from the World Bank should be adapted by countries. But history has shown that this is not the case. And even the bank has realized that different contexts, the history of a country, its political economy, its social structure, its culture, these are all, its natural resources endowment, all of its specific things that, I understand from a national government perspective, yes, it makes sense for to enact some of these policies, but sometimes it's also important to go the opposite way and use the communities to figure out what the issues are and how those solutions should be enacted to make it more efficient and more at a local level.
How do you do that if you're the World Bank, huge organization? Who do you have at the local level that
stakeholder engagement? They don't do it very well in all instances, but stakeholder engagement. The World Bank's audience are countries. The World Bank stakeholders are countries. So it's just a scale problem. But if you see the way that the bank has evolved in recent years, we've gone from sort of a more didactic method to country assistance strategies and country partnership strategies, which are they're basically strategies for a country's development and growth that are completed or enacted in cooperation with the country. They tell you what their needs and priorities are, and in the end, it's just a matter of how to make efficient usage of limited resources, which is an issue faced. It's an issue faced at USAID. It's an issue faced in my team in the work that we do, let alone at a country level. And I think that's essentially the end goal.
Yeah, and we'll get to the money question in a bit. But Sean, what about USAID and this question of how you do what you do, sort of between your offices here and what goes on in the field and on the ground?
Yes. So we have 23 missions in the field, and then we operate in 44 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And my bureau is just sub-Saharan Africa, so none of the Maghreb. Historically, AID has operated in a way where the field, I think, had a lot more sort of say and sort of did their things, and for better or worse, we're doing things connected sort of to the country, but at the macro level. And of course, USAID, we spend big money, so though we do a lot of work for smallholder farmers, what we do is, in fact, we pay IFPRI, and we do actually pay IFPRI to do a lot of that work for us. We pay other implementers. So So the bulk of USAID's money gets spent through others who are actually implementing the work, but there's been a lot of big changes to that very recently. In fact, in this administration, the time that I've been there, first one has to accept that in the 80s and 90s, a lot of things were done wrong, as my colleagues here have said. I think we got to a point where we were really just spending big money. We didn't have good results. We didn't have good evaluation methods necessarily. We were sort of doing, we used to do a lot of big ag back in the day. The Green Revolution, USAID was a prominent part of that in our, rich storied history. And we got away from agriculture. We've since gotten away from democracy and governance work. It's really just a tiny bit of what we spend money on these days. Part of that comes out of the 1990s and making poor choices and supporting, sort of leaders who were less than democratic and just pouring money in. And it's very hard, even to this day, it's very hard to measure DG results. All that is to say that now we have really quite a different approach. In Africa, we still use a lot of implementers, and we still have a lot of big money things out there. Feed the Future is really super focused on 1, 2, 3 value chains in a country like Tanzania, for example. And it's really all about economic growth. It's about making sure that wealth is actually generated for smallholder farmers so that they get, seed technology that can increase their yields, proper land management, all these sort of things. But it's hyper-focused on a few of the, in every country where there's Feed the Future, I just use this as an example, it's basically focused on the crops that give you the most bang for your buck in terms of generating income and or providing nutritional content to be consumed locally. So there's a lot more focus now. And the other big thing that I'll just say, that the big transformation happening at AID as we speak, is this idea that we're partnering with folks. So we're no longer just taking U.S. taxpayer dollars and then spending that, through big mechanisms in the field. We're now actually taking some of our money and using that to leverage the private sector. So Feed the Future is an example of doing this. We have huge deals with Cargill. There's a project in Ethiopia on chickpeas that we did with Pepsi. Really big private sector players who come in with their own cash and use the expertise of USAID.
Do they come in with their own agendas as well as their own cash?
Well, you always have to be, look out for that. But we've actually over the past 5 years, we have a very excellent track record with a lot of private sector companies that people would think, shocking, Monsanto even, Cargill, like I said, some big ag industrial complex types, but that have been very committed to Feed the Future and to actually, increasing smallholder farmers' yields and therefore income. But this partnering thing's been interesting. I've worked a lot on it. It really is a whole new way of sort of looking at the problem set. And so rather than just thinking that we've got all the experts on development and we're going to make these changes, you're really, our money is not endless. It's been a tough year. We still have a lot of money, but, it is less than 1% of the U.S. budget, even though the average American thinks it's 25% of our budget. No, we don't spend that much money on USAID. But the leveraging the private sector just makes sense in so many ways. It just infuses you with all these new ideas about how to actually tackle problems. And taking a private sector approach is ultimately what is going to be sustainable in a particular country, so that people aren't just getting handouts. You're actually working on things that are going to continue long after some USAID mission decides to fund it or not fund it.
So what is this private sector approach then?
It's, first and foremost, we're sort of open for business in terms of people who come in with proposals now. We've got a whole global development lab set up, which if anyone just goes to usaid.gov and clicks on the lab, you'll find, and the lab's working with a lot of the big US universities working on agriculture
So it's
for example.
entrepreneurial, a sort of innovation lab? In a
Well, there's
way,
that.
or-
That's a piece of it. I mean, we're basically willing to work with anyone, and we have a whole team of people now that is dedicated to do that. And we now have relationship managers.
Wow, this
so
is very different from
it's very
what
different
I
from
imagine.
like, your grandfather's
Yes.
USAID. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of it throws a lot of people off, and you face some tough questions from our colleagues on the Hill sometimes. But I think overwhelmingly, people have loved the approach. And it really is sort of changing things, and it's been fun to watch it just sort of happen. I'll use one example from my own experience in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This guy who's a connected guy comes to our administrator and says, "Hey, I've got this great idea. I've got a couple of these people working on it. I've seen you say to the Congress, and I've seen you talk in front of university students and say that USAID is it's using a new model of development, one that puts partnership first. And I've got this idea for partnering, so how do I do it?" And he said, well, go talk to the Africa Bureau and we'll see what we can do. So we got dragged out on this trip to say, okay, well, we got to humor the administrator and do what he says, right? A year and a half later, we've actually got a very cutting edge project, one that is small right now in scale, but that we're hoping can actually scale up. And possibly be a healthcare delivery solution for places that are in transition where there's been a lot of conflict. So this has been in the eastern DRC, which, as folks know, has had the longest raging war possibly in history. It's been going on a long time, and the local DRC clinics just weren't able to really provide even the most basic healthcare. And we went out to look at a clinic out there, and even us, veterans. My boss at the time, 22-year veteran of the Foreign Service with USAID, had never seen a clinic in such bad shape. And so, because this guy had a wacky idea, and because we worked in partnership with them from the beginning at sort of thinking through how we could do it, even though we faced a lot of naysayers and people, you get into procurement sensitive stuff, and because I can't just hand out money to do development projects. The government frowns on that. So you have to be clever and you have to be persistent, but you can do things in a way that we haven't been doing it. And so we're just starting to see the results of this. It's been great. I was just back out there a few weeks ago, 5-6 weeks ago, and there's a little clinic operating, and they're seeing 8 to 10 patients a day, and they're actually paying for their healthcare services. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea behind this thing is that it's actually it's a private sector health clinic, which is not in itself a novel idea, but one in a place where people have such limited resources to pay. But the idea is sustainability, so that's why it's set up that way.
Do you have anything at IFPRI that is like this, where you're taking on corporations as partners in your work, or is that something that is not part of your kind of strategy to get things done?
We are a research institute, so mainly if you talk of corporations or private sector working with them, we can only involve them if our research is involving private sector. For example, right. we look at the private public partnerships. Mm-hmm. In such kind of research, yes, we involve them and we do some research with them to just talk with them about how they perceive and accept some of the things. Do they make profit by working with the small farmers, for example? Those are the kind of things that we look at. A very good example is subsidy. We know that there are governments in several places, not only in Africa, even in India, several places, the government provides subsidies. Now, the subsidies may actually harm development of the private sector. And for example, if there is fertilizer subsidy given and the fertilizer is sold at half the market price, it is destroying everything. So we are economists, and we hate subsidies wherever they are on earth. We hate them. In the US, wherever they are, we don't like them. And even an economist is here, they will agree with me. But as Francis of Assisi said, he was praying to God, saying, well, God, please help me change things that I can change, and to accept things that I cannot change. Now, we economists, because we don't like subsidies, it doesn't mean that the governments are not going to help them. They're going to help them. So we try to look at how can the subsidies be given in a way which is going to be better than what they do. For example, if possible, don't hand out those subsidies to the people. Rather, pass them through the private sector and they give the coupons, for example, and do some other things which are going to improve the subsidies. So we work with the private sector only when it comes to a research question that how will it be? How is it going to be more economical, more beneficial if we involve the private sector? If so, how? So in answering such questions, we involve the private sector, but not in dealings with them unless we are giving them tenders for something that we want them to do. But in terms of business and the research process itself, we involve them only when it comes to such issues as private.
Who funds you and who does support you?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, the first one is...
We do.
Sure. USAID. USAID contributes a very large chunk of our money. For example, in my department, 35% of money that we receive comes from USAID, followed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It also gives a very big chunk of money, about 18%. And that's in my department. At the institutional level, same kind of comparable figures. But we are not in Washington by accident. It is because this is where the money is. So. And not only that, because a lot of decisions are taken within the Washington, D.C. area. That's also a very big issue. The World Bank also actually is the chair of the donor community that funds the IFPRI. So we are very close to people who make a lot of decisions and who make a lot of impact to the places where we work. We work in developing countries, and believe it or not, I make a lot of trips. In 1 year, I go about 500,000 miles. Because US to us is like a dormitory, we work in developing countries. So all over the world, that's what we do. But if we are sitting in Washington, I think we have the policy influence of the donor community, and the donor community has a big clout on developmental policies in developing countries. And sitting around with them and having them a chat with them, it helps a lot if we have a very big policy influence.
I'm sure it does.
And that's the answer to your question, by the way, is where do you have the time to think through the big development ideas and challenges? It's on that 15-hour plane ride to Johannesburg from Dulles. That's where you have the time.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's
think it
probably
through.
where it happens. You're trapped. You have to do something with that. Tomorrow, talk about how the World Bank has changed. I mean, we've heard about this kind of very roiling and interesting sort of era of failures moving to successes with USAID. What about World Bank?
The World Bank reinvents itself, I think, every decade or so.
Really? It's on a schedule.
It's on
to do
a
that?
schedule. I don't know how much the students know about how the World Bank was instituted in 1944.
Yeah,
but
please talk about that.
Its first client country was France, to whom we loaned, I believe, $250 million to reconstruct. I think it was infrastructure, economic and social infrastructure, buildings, just to make France look as pretty as it does today, which is why we spend money to go there and visit Paris. That was the bank's first lending project. Today, we have 188 member countries who are shareholders. We have offices in 120 countries and over 10,000 people who work just for the World Bank.
Wow.
And I don't know if they count all the consultants, because then that's really
Oh, you never. Rule number one in Washington: you don't count the consultants.
So it's a massive institution that went from lending to one country to lending to a few more, and then from lending just to infrastructure projects to maybe we should think about how women's voice and agency can help development. How do female-headed households, how are they best equipped to be able to lift their families out of poverty? Because I guess the usual argument is that women make better decisions, but who am I to say?
It's a fact.
To other projects like my group, climate finance, to financing climate smart agriculture, or thinking about these issues that people aren't necessarily thinking of, but raising, here are the red flags, we need to think about it now, these are the things that you could do with it, and then here's where we're looking more into the issue and trying to find solutions. And that's just sort of an overview. Now, in terms of the way, and I think the way that the bank's structured, from I think the 5 people who lived in Europe or lived here back when they only had 2 or 3 client countries, to the way the institution itself is structured in different departments, the topics on which it touches upon, the sectors within which it works, the landscape of its staff, which has gone from financial analysts and engineers who were needed to build infrastructure projects to now include financial analysts, risks and insurance agents, doctors, economists, social scientists, educators, everything you can think of. Anyone who's doing anything could probably find a department within the bank within which their expertise or their experience could come to value. But at the same time, a good point that you made earlier is that money is influence. So the bank was started here because this is where the money was. It was strategic. This is where the money was, and that influence has sort of kept going throughout the years a bit. We have 5 major donors, and we all know them. I'm sure you could guess if you didn't. France, Germany, Japan, the US, and I'm probably missing one, but these are the 5 main countries, and they have the most influence. And then the 20 other executive directors at the bank represent the other 183 countries that are part of the bank. And of course, this you can see by the way that it's diffused what the influence is. But essentially, to bring another point that Sean made earlier, public-private partnerships mean sustainability. And that's in all areas. On one end, you have the way that the bank functions. Where do we get our funding? You have the contributions, but then how do you keep the wheel turning, right? We invest. We issue bonds and other financial instruments, and we invest, and we work with the private sector from that perspective in order to grow our money in those ways. But even if you grow your money, we're spending so much on a yearly basis that this would not be sustainable. We have limited resources. When the stock market takes a fall, or we have a financial crisis like the ones we take a fall. It impacts the money that we have to do our work. And so the way you leverage that, another keyword leverage, is to work with the private sector, because then you end up with projects like resilience. There's this resilience insurance program that was started in Ethiopia, I believe. And they partner up with private insurance markets and then also link up with women's savings groups. And you use all these tools traditionally that have been used, that have been spread out into different programs and projects, and you find a way to combine them and make them efficient. And this has helped Ethiopian clients be able to deal with constant droughts and recurrent droughts, which we're expecting to sort of to magnify due to climate change over the coming years. And then you have other areas. For example, why wouldn't you link up with a phone company who make tons of money in developing countries? In sub-Saharan Africa, I think you go to the to the most backwards villages, and you'll find people with cell phones. Right. It's just these people they're making money. Exactly. It's a new world, globalization.
On the table.
So why wouldn't you work with phone companies in order to be able to link up smallholder farmers to markets, so that they know the price of their sales, so that you sort of establish some kind of regulation that allows them to get the best price for their product, and thus be able to get more for what they make, and be able to expand their operations, to learn, to share information and knowledge progressively. Private sector companies not only have funding, they have cash. More and more so, corporate social responsibility has become a huge area in development. They don't necessarily always do it right, but if they partner with institutions who may be wrong but think they are doing it right, like ourselves, it provides an opportunity to leverage and get more for our buck. From that perspective.
Yeah, I was very interested to hear recently Oxfam and Coca-Cola are,
Yeah.
for example, partnering. Anyway, do go on.
Absolutely. And I think,
like, whoa,
so my
okay.
last point on that would have been private consulting firms. We're so used to hearing the traditional Deloitte, the audit firms, McKinsey. McKinsey has a global institute. Some could say, what do they know about development? But they're interested.
More and more.
More and more they know more, and they're investing in this area. You have NGOs and Dalberg, which are actual development consulting firms. That's what they do. They, and it is pure private sector, but they are helping sort of share and spread that knowledge. And, these are all, development is no longer a public institution thing. It's expanding.
That's right.
And I think that's
right.
incredible, because essentially that's where the money is. Everything has a price, and they keep making money. You can't keep sort of churning $5 forever. You're going to hit a point where you're no longer as effective as you were 10, 20 years ago.
It's interesting because all of you have talked about this. You have a very deep faith in markets and the efficiency of markets and, the private sector and the sort of way forward. Is there a paradigm shift coming at all in your worlds? And if so, what will that look like?
I'll be very quick and brief on that. Yes, the bank is switching to become a knowledge bank. It's becoming a knowledge bank because the bank no longer has a competitive advantage in being a lending bank, particularly when you have regional banks like the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and increasingly the African Development Bank, and taking over some of that space, some of that area in the lending areas. Mm-hmm. Not only do they have a competitive advantage for being regional, they have experts who are local, know the context, know what they need, and as they're moving into that space, the bank has to reinvent itself to keep being mm-hmm. relevant, and that has been to take advantage of what it is that it offers, which is a concentration of experts and sort of high network individuals who have the capacity to research these areas mm-hmm. and have the luxury to be able to research them and not be constantly sort of reacting to issues and situations. And so the bank is becoming more of a knowledge bank because there is a paradigm shift. And I think that's been reflected in the different groups that have been determined, an energy group, the water group, etc. Mm-hmm.
The topic here is, what about IFPRI? Paradigm shift?
Yes. We had been doing research, and I think one of the things which can be quite interesting to this audience is donor money helping development? If so, if not, what are the reasons behind that? And I go to what Sean said in the beginning. Look, at the very beginning, there was two objectives to many of the donor money that was flowing into Africa and the other low-income countries. There was a policy influence that there was West-East.
Stop the communists,
exactly.
Number one.
Communist. Right. That was one of the objectives. As such, you may find some of the money going to these developing countries for reasons that are not actually going to be helping the people who are really intended. And the government, unfortunately, many, it's not only US or any other, they were spending a lot of money because of political objectives.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, things are changing. Only a few months ago, there was a big bunch, there was a motorcade here in Washington. We know it very well. All the president of Africa came to Washington, D.C., and they went to the White House. Guess what? U.S. is late.
Yeah.
There are other countries, China and other countries, they have been inviting the heads of state from Africa to go speak with them, not about the donor money, to talk about the development, the business, entrepreneurship, and all such kind of things. Now, that's a very big shift. It's a very big shift, which is it's affecting the way we conduct research and the way history has been teaching us. History has been teaching us that, well, if you throw money to the people, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
it doesn't work. You have to go speak with them, understand their problems, but you have to go speak in a way which is effective. I can give you 2 examples, very stark examples, and I'm going to use my own country, Tanzania. Tanzanians are very polite people, very people who you can go to them, they'll make you happy even though you are not. Now, if you go to them, USAID, oh, we want to give you help. They'll say, oh, yeah. So they will listen to you and they'll, oh, Sean wants to give his money towards this area. And they'll magnify that problem and say, oh, that's our problem which has been troubling us. So that's where we need money. So you go there with preconceived ideas of what the Tanzanians need.
Right.
They'll make a case to get your money.
Sure.
The Germans will come, they will have a different idea, and they'll also go and orient their ideas towards what they
Just out
perceive
of
to
cultural
be the problem
politeness,
that you have.
if you like.
Now, go to Ethiopia with the same thing. They will turn away your money, even though they are starving. So, now, these 2 countries are now looking, they are telling us the past and the present. The countries these days need to be saying no to aid that does not meet their needs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Will they? It's pretty.
Yeah, it's changing.
It is
As I
changing.
said, US hosted the heads of state, which is a very good thing for the new administration, that they are looking and listening to them, and they're not looking at them as recipients of aid. They are looking at them as partners in development. And
Right.
there are some things that we can't help it. We'll have to give aid to help them. But the way we deliver that aid should be done in a way which is actually responding to the actual problems. And that requires a lot of skills to be able to understand those problems. You don't want to learn into the problem, as I explained using my example of my own country. You need to understand those people for you to understand what really is their problem, because instead of throwing money into their face.
So, Sean, you talked, I think, you had largely talked about this question of paradigm shift for USAID, but feel free to elaborate on that. But how much then will this, I think of you as being quite in the thrall of congressional funding and politics. Is that lessening now? Is that not so true? Of the 3 organizations, I think of USAID as the most unambiguously funded by
Yeah, that's right.
taxpayer dollars, but
Yes.
obviously not
Yeah.
so true.
Well, no, we are, so my salary is 100% comes from the taxpayer. Thank you all. Thank you very much. For those of you who are
You're welcome.
American, I appreciate that. It's not a great salary, but I'm not going to complain. No, but that's what we're doing. So if you look at like what we have in Africa, roughly 6.5 billion, that's sort of the high end, and that's a lot more money than we had even 10 years ago. But if you look at like a little program we've got, like the Development Credit Authority, here's that we take a little bit of money, we make a $100 million loan guarantee, essentially. And then a private sector bank in, say, Tanzania, that wouldn't want to consider smallholder farmers because they're too risky. All of a sudden, if the U.S. government's going to say, hey, well, you know what, if they go bust, we'll cover you up to $100 million. All of a sudden they're like, well, okay, well then I guess we can lend to them and make more money, have a broader customer base, and some of that risk is defrayed by. So most of the time with our Development Credit Authority, I don't know exactly what the rates are, but it's extremely successful. Almost nobody doesn't pay back, and we've had to cover very, very few loans, right? So that's we're guaranteeing 100 million, right? But we're not actually spending a dime. So it's just a really powerful way to actually take the money that we have, and sure, if we had to, we could do that. But so that's what we're just trying to do across the board. So it's, why fund something with, so for instance, this thing that we were doing in the DRC, which we hope, this group that approached us originally, we did a lot of sort of what we call co-creation to figure out the problem together and discuss it together. rather than we just design the whole thing, we put it on the street and we say, okay, people bid on this, and then, Comonix or one of these bandits would say, oh, we can implement that the best, and they'd have some big, long, document saying, and we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we say, great, and yeah, of course, then the people aren't involved, and, there's not necessarily sustainability built in. That whole process works better now than it ever has, too, so I don't mean to criticize. But but with this little project, these people came to us and they said, okay, we think we can get $3 million together for this. Can you get $3 million? And we said, sure. Okay, you bring $3 million over. So there we have 6, rather than us just taking $3 million and saying, we're going to do this. Yeah. So it really is a powerful new paradigm. And it's, you mentioned Coca-Cola with Oxfam. Coca-Cola is one of our biggest partners. We do a ton with them. They're huge on water. What does Coca-Cola need to sell their product? They need water.
Fresh water.
So they're really good at actually thinking through water sustainability. They've spent a lot of money on it, and they're really good. Walmart, of all places, is getting very crafty about Africa. They of course bought Massmart, which is a big South Africa chain, and so I get phone calls and I'll meet with Walmart and they'll ask questions about places that you wouldn't imagine that they would have their eyes on, but they see. This is the thing, and I work just on Africa, but Africa's got 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. So the idea of a place that needs handouts is really, sure, we still have issues where you've got things like Ebola that happen in a poor country like Liberia that has no capacity to deal with something of that magnitude, and then so we're going to have to help out, and it sets them back. It's really unfortunate. But you've got other countries where they're now on a path where they just really, some can tell the donors, take a hike. We don't, we'll deal with the Chinese or with other investors. The Turks have gotten very big on investing in Africa. The Saudis own like half of the arable land in Ethiopia. It's kind of crazy. There's a lot of folks now see Africa as not just a place to extract resources, but a burgeoning consumer market. The youth, the demographics of the whole thing, super interesting. You've got, almost 2/3 of the whole continent now is under 30, and then, most of those people are actually under 16. And so you're just going to have this huge, and they're all, we started this great initiative, thanks to the president again, called the Young African Leaders Initiative. And it's just, I'm embarrassed to meet these young folks who are like roughly my age, because they're just 20 times smarter than me. It really puts things into perspective. And there's tons of them out there. So we brought 500 young fellows to DC this past summer, and I forget the actual numbers, although I could get them right after this meeting. But I think we had 50,000 applications for 500 slots. It was something ridiculous, and it's just the process is opened again, and they're getting again crazy demand to send these young folks over, and so we responded by actually building regional leadership centers on the continent. So we're starting off with 4 of them, one in Dakar, actually, one in Accra, and I've worked on this quite closely, one in Nairobi and one in Pretoria, so that we can actually expand this idea of like just working with African youth, letting them know that we care, giving them a space where they can access, whether it's technology or courses or training, and we're trying to do a bunch of leadership training, because that's what they asked for when they came here as fellows. And so there's just all sorts of exciting things going on that we just didn't do in the past. And I think it really is. It's much more of an investment mentality now. And it's about getting rid of the stovepipes and integrating things. You mentioned resilience. That's another issue. So, to get to the future, 10, 15 years, hopefully then we don't even have to have there's just sort of development. There's not the humanitarian, development, economic growth. Everything is kind of seamlessly integrated. And working together.
That sounds like an amazing future. So before I open the floor up for questions, just a couple more questions for you guys. One would be something that, to go off of a comment I think, Tamara, you made in the green room. How do you guys collaborate being in Washington? Or, are there things you don't do because you're territorial about your turf? Are there ways that you think your organizations would benefit from greater collaboration? I'm going to throw that to you since you raised it.
I see Sean
smirking.
Just smirking at me. Some things we do well, some things we don't do well. I think that I'll always start with that little disclaimer. But one of the reasons why I think, well, first of all, my impression, personal opinion, is that we could do more collaboration. Could do significantly more collaboration, given just the breadth of resources within this small little town of Washington, D.C., and given the many institutions that are here, I mean, the incredible talent, the number of experts that we have. And that's not just in D.C., it's across the world, which is difficult, right? One example is that right now, a big project that I'm working on is this report we're preparing on poverty and climate change, which, as you can imagine, touches upon everything from health and social protection to agriculture and what that's going to look like in the future, to land degradation, natural resource management. So it spans across the globe. And then you have situations like we wanted to explore the dependence of the poor on ecosystem services. We don't have we have experts at the bank. We don't have the frontier research expertise. There's an institution called C4, which is based in Indonesia, that does a lot of the work in this area. So it's because the bank is changing, and because the bank now is open to sort of a younger demographic. We're not there yet. Tons of dinosaurs there. But you do have these young new PhD economists that are coming in with their networks and using that to expand and look beyond the bank and try and draw in these people. And so what the World Bank puts out isn't just the people who are within the institution of the World Bank. It really is whoever they were able to pull together. And I think the richness of what that looks like increases the more people you can pull together. I think the scope of our work and the size of the institution makes that very difficult to do even inside the institution. I have been working there for 2 years. Sustainable Development Network was massive. Today, every day, I meet someone new within our new climate change group who goes, "Oh, how long have you been here?" I was like, "Well, I've actually been sitting at the top office of this entire department for the past 2 years." But it's difficult. Everyone's in their own little cave, and you have deadlines. You have your fiscal year. You have your spending to get out. You have this project. You have that board. And I think that is replicated within every single institution and every single department. And I think, unless you have someone whose job it is only to go around and find these links and put people together, it's really difficult to do. But I think that is an area within which we could improve. Diplomatic answer.
Yeah, we work a lot with the bank and others. In fact, we have a huge, and I'm sure the bank does as well. You have an office that does just donor coordination, which is great because we'd sort of didn't have enough people doing that, but now we do, and now I feel like I'm always fighting with them because I'm like, well, would you let me know what's going on with the, again, it's the integration is, the horizontal integration is always the hardest, but you do need people to focus on the donor relationships because they're complex and there's tons of it going on. And I could spend my whole life just going to World Bank meetings, eating in their lovely cafeteria,
So good.
And some people, some people in the development community, they do that. They're sitting meetings all day long because there's lots of them here.
Meetings, no work, right?
But I think we work well together. At USAID, we work best with folks like the bank who are sort of really external to us, and we work less well with ourselves and with the State Department. That's our real nemesis. We really like to.
Interesting.
It's a sibling sort of rivalry where they're kind of more the parent. It gets complicated. But it used to be that we were a totally independent organization, but now actually our administrator reports to the Secretary of State. That actually happened during the Bush administration. And it creates, for the most part, most things operate the same. But there's this idea, getting back to the private sector, there's an idea now that our ambassadors are actually like CEOs. So they're actually commanding the entire American government kind of, corporate strategy in the field, which is actually a good way to look at it, but comes with some complications,
I would imagine so.
So we have a lot of internal fighting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to actually open it up for questions from you guys, I think. Gabi has a mic, so please ask your questions, and then I'm going to let Ephraim probably wrap it up by talking to you about your own futures. Who has questions? Christine has a question.
I'll call on people randomly if you want me to. I'll do it.
Hi guys, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. My name is Christine and I am a sophomore studying politics, rights, and development. And I have a question for Sean regarding the anti-prostitution pledge. So I did some work this summer with the Sonagachi project in Calcutta, and I'm curious if you could just speak a little bit about how, I know there's a paradigm shift going on, like you mentioned, towards more of an investment strategy and less of a handout strategy.
Right.
And so the anti-prostitution pledge, really briefly, basically says that NGOs that don't explicitly take a stance against prostitution can't receive aid from USAID currently.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think last year it was overturned domestically because of the First Amendment, but that situation hasn't changed for foreign NGOs that are desperately in need of these funds for HIV/AIDS or anti-trafficking measures. So I was just curious if you happen to have any information about that.
No, congratulations. You found a topic that I know absolutely nothing about, I'm ashamed to say. That is interesting. I mean, I am familiar, we deal with these types of things, meaning we'll often come up with a, policy that gets handed down that has, a lot of times it's not our fault, right? So during the Bush administration,
Yeah, this
of
is
course,
Bush administration.
right, there's a whole abortion thing, right? So that in the public health sphere, particularly maternal and child health, was, extremely problematic. So I'm familiar with the kind of issue, but I don't know this one at all.
Well, maybe I could phrase it a little bit more broadly. Do you think sort of remnant legislation like this is going to be sort of shifted out with this paradigm shift?
Oh, I see. Yeah, probably not.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, probably not. It is interesting. I've not done as much sort of interaction on the Hill as I would have liked in this job. Though I certainly, typically the Hill likes the big bosses to go and explain themselves, and I've gone a couple times to watch or whatever, and I've talked to staffers and you get phone calls. But I've not engaged, heavily. Again, we have a whole office that does Hill engagement, our Legislative and Public Affairs office. So that's sort of outsourced. But I've seen and I've gotten some crazy questions. I mean, and this is just how our system works, right? I mean, it's the Congress's prerogative to haul us in there and ask tough questions, and if they don't like the answers, to legislate ways that we will do something. So, great example of this is there's an amazing staffer who's been on the Hill for 150 years, and works for Senator Leahy on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. I won't mention this guy by name, but anybody who knows the system will know who it is. But he is anti-hydro, and mostly because the World Bank really screwed this stuff up 20 years ago, and there's a whole bunch of gigantic investments in crappy projects with dictators involved, and the people mostly have not really benefited, with the exception of like Aswan Day. Some of the biggies have gone okay, but there's been a lot of sort of mismanagement of big hydro projects. But there's one in the DRC that could literally change Inga, which you're familiar with, and the World Bank recently passed their TA with an abstain vote from the United States, but that's okay. Hydro in Africa has huge potential. I mean, particularly you're talking about just the needing power for economic growth, because that is the number one constraint that all of Africa faces in terms of really getting to the next phase of economic growth. It's having power to actually do stuff, make things. And then if you look at the Inga Dam, I don't know how much people know about how power is generated and how much power you can get out of different sources. But just this next phase of Inga, which the World Bank is working on, is 4,800 megawatts. I mean, that's not quite doubling Africa's entire installed capacity for the entire continent. I mean, it's absolutely huge. But the staffer in our last year's appropriation put in a thing that said that it is the policy of the United States to oppose all large hydro, and it wasn't geared towards us. So we, as USAID, can technically still work on it. But it was geared towards our Treasury Department, which manages our relationship with the World Bank, and so it caused us all kinds of trouble. And then there's the threat of legislation out there to basically just ban us from doing it. And for better or worse, and I won't say that it's totally crazy, but there are things that are get more into the religious sort of realm, and they can do it because that's what the Congress does.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Priya. I'm a junior in Stern, studying business and political economy. And I had a question for Tamara. I'm also really interested in sustainable development, and I know the World Bank puts out a ton of amazing reports every year. But something for my program, we had to write World Bank, not World Bank, but development reports similar to those of the World Bank for different countries. And something like we saw a report that said something like 30% of World Bank reports, particularly country development reports, are never read by anyone. They've been accessed less than like 10 times off the website. And I think a lot of big institutions kind of have that problem where they put out a lot of amazing research, but oftentimes the impact is minimal in certain projects or it isn't seen at all. So do you see the work you're doing as making an impact, and how important is that to you when you were like deciding to go to the World Bank and looking at other jobs?
I'll start from the end and work myself. Like how important it is, very important to me, and I because I'm one of those people that I want to, like, you know, it's almost impossible. It's impossible if you're working, especially for massive institutions. If you want to do that, you go to a small NGO in Senegal, maybe in Louga, and then you work on this project where you give the money and you watch the family, and then you see, okay, well, there's improvement. But aside from that, you'll almost never see the actual impact of everything that you do, which is very difficult. But I am one of those people who I have to see it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And why am I in it? Then I will go get an MBA from Stern and go into the private sector and just make money. But that's not what I chose to do, to invest my life in. And that's why I'm in this work. So I understand, I know, and then there's multiple reports like that, which we love, especially when they come out of our independent evaluation group. But the bank is old. The bank is like your great-great-great-great-grandfather who's sitting here today and looking at your iPad like, what? It's a magazine? How do I read it? And flips it around instead of just, going through. And then you have some of the newer institutions. You have the 3-year-old who looks at a magazine and starts going like this because he knows how to use an iPad or an iPhone and doesn't understand why your magazine isn't flipping. So, it's the generational thing. And I think the bank is starting to try and find ways to engage with new technology, with reaching new target groups, new audiences, which it didn't have before, right? Because when we're talking about a knowledge bank, it's this whole entire transformation as well. It was okay, we'll do research. So we have these policy working paper research series, which is like the bank's internal journal system. And almost half of the papers you will find there from before 1995, 1996 are almost pure academic papers, a few policy papers, but they weren't made for an external audience. And then progressively that has changed. And then now you have these massive reports, which for good or worse now have key messages, which, as I was saying earlier,
talking points, yeah.
Talking points, right? There's also the negative aspects of boxing things in and trying to come up with, the things you can throw out at the press release and, that will be highlighted everywhere. I think recently the new climate economy report came out, and we wanted to make sure Obama sent that tweet that he sent about how it's no longer costly it's not really costly to address the climate, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those people with influence that can go out and disseminate your message, and so they've restructured the way that reports are done to do that. But then, again, that depends what your target audiences are.
I saw that report online. It was very clever. I mean, the sort of chapter by chapter,
Exactly.
and sort of you can break it down,
Exactly.
and, to the sound
If you go to
bite.
the new climate economy,
Right.
Or Google it, it's actually a virtual online. It's like the book was put into a web page. And then you can go through different chapters and play around with it, and I'm sure it's Googleable, and you can find different facts everywhere. And just one example of that, our president, who is so innovative, around spring, I don't know if it's spring meetings or last year's annual meetings. So spring meetings, annual meetings are meetings within which we welcome finance and development ministers from all over the world, who are actually representative of the board of governors of the bank to come, and it's the World Bank and IMF meetings. It's usually when we overrun the city with black cars, with blacked out, and all you hear is police cars all over. And I believe last year at some point, it wasn't. It was during the UN Secretary General meetings in New York, because I was told that this was playing in the little taxi screen all over New York. Our president had just put together this little infogram video that highlights our two main objectives right now: to end poverty extreme poverty, which means to reduce extreme poverty to 3% by 2030. Lofty goal. And then the second goal is to promote shared prosperity, which kind of shows as well the shift that the bank has gone through from just focusing on the poorest to realizing that there are poor in every country. So there is the extreme poor of the entire world, and then there are the poor that you find in the United States of America who also deserve target audience. There are the poor that you find in Tanzania or South Africa, which is a very advanced economy. But you look at South Africa, you might not, you go there, it's like being in the US. You might not think that this is a really, it's not a development country. But it's more about sort of sharing wealth and prosperity than just focusing on key groups. And this video I thought was ridiculous, but was very popular. And I think that's one way that they think, that's the link that you can copy and paste onto your YouTube and gets shared a couple of 100,000 times.
That's the new bank.
That's the new bank that he's trying to aim for.
It was the same at USAID. It's exactly the same. I mean, our administrator has been revolutionary in getting himself out there. He tweets all the time. Although he once tweeted while he was sitting on a panel like this, and I was like, wait a minute, you didn't tweet that. I was a staffer.
You have a team of tweeters.
Yeah. That's how it works. Even just the publications that we put out. We do an annual letter now that, is just fantastic, which we stole from the Gates Foundation, because Bill Gates does his annual letter. Things are just, even just the 5 years that I've been doing this, and I'm certainly not that experienced at it, it's just changed a ton. And the energy that you get from, young people about development challenges, it feels like USAID is much less of a sort of technical, wonky thing, and it's much more of a place. We've hired a bunch of bankers lately to do things like DCA. You're getting the sort of best and brightest from a variety of fields now, and not just former Peace Corps volunteers who love Africa, guilty. It's exciting.
And blogs, that's another example. Yeah. Blogs are huge now, for better or worse as well, at being able to take this bite-sized knowledge and putting it all together. And earlier you mentioned I represent the bank in the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, which was founded by the bank, and this was one success story of working with different organizations. The bank released a report on green growth in 2012. And around the same time, you'd hear about green economy from the OECD. That's the European Organization for Economic and Cooperation in Development in Europe, which is their version of, I guess, the World Bank. It doesn't really do much funding, it's knowledge, but they do some of the similar work. And then you had the Global Green Growth Institute in Korea, which was created. And UNEP, the United Nations Economic Program. And everyone is talking about green economy and green growth and using different words to talk about the same thing. And they're really all promoting the same thing, just using different terms, and it's a bit confusing. And so my supervisor, chief economist of the World Bank, kind of drew everybody she knew together from her network as well. And they put together this Green Growth Knowledge Platform as a space within which they could all come together and find one common message to display. No one's infringing on anyone else's space, because they all do different things and have different target audiences. But it's useful to be able to talk through these things together and come up with common material and common messages
a knowledge commons.
A knowledge commons. And at the same time, as a Green Growth Knowledge Platform, it's essentially virtual. And I bring this as an example because two of the things that I was involved with was we had these green growth practitioners workshops, one in Indonesia and one in the DRC, where we brought together everyone working on subjects that touch upon green growth, the green economy. And one essential part of the workshop was that within its organization, there was this team of tweeters and blogs, and these are things that are now part of anything you do. Right, you have to be live tweeting the event. If you're not, somebody else is live tweeting for you.
Are we live tweeting this?
Yeah, are you? Yeah. This isn't
Someone
one
might
year, right?
be. I don't know. So is that a way in for all of them? Basically, is through social media? I guess is there another question before we sort of wrap up?
Something really hard.
How about it? All right. So very end, if you could each briefly talk to them about, if any of them are seeing their futures with your organizations, what's your advice for them?
Well, I think the talk today was quite diverse, and it's good that you brought people who are just changing the world. Mm-hmm. Now, young people, we hear the question that they are throwing is about very practical things.
Yes.
And, they are thinking about what they're going to be doing after graduating from NYU. Come to IFPRI. We have a lot of challenges, and we have a lot of exciting things that we do. And I didn't get a chance of talking about how we do the policy influence, but I think one of the things that we do is that the REPEC ranks institutions in the world of the ones which are doing very well. We were ranked number 2 last year.
Wow.
In the world. And when you come to the think tanks, the place to go when you are looking for information related to poverty reduction, food security, and all those things, we also ranked number 8, which is quite high. So come to IFPRI, and we do have very strong research programs. We attract a lot of money from our friends. We don't compete with them, by the way, because they give us money to do the research. So they were competing, but for me, I'm not competitor with any of them. They are my friends, and they all love me. So come to us, and we do a lot of research. And if you want to enjoy development, and to us, just like me, when I was coming to US, I was trying to answer that question: why are the poor farmers working so hard, but still they remain in poverty? That's a very big question that we all have the duty to answer. And the young people again, that's all the interesting question that they need to be addressing. And I think there's quite a bit of things, and I have some. I brought very few publications here which I can share with them. They can understand how IFPRI works, and the kind of thing that can be quite attractive, and that's why I thought maybe I should leave them behind.
Great, wonderful.
Yeah.
And Tamara, Sean, any last words, final words of advice, encouragement?
I'm about to be very unfair. So here's why you should work at the World Bank. Right now, whether or want to work at the World Bank.
Can I work at the World Bank?
You can, Sean. One of the greatest things from NYU, I wasn't in DC, I was in New York, and both of my master's programs was the breadth of subjects that we touched upon, the things that I worked on. And I'm starting to get to the point in my career where that's becoming really difficult to not specialize. But I've enjoyed thus far, both academically and all the opportunities that I've had to be able to touch upon a wide array of subjects. And I have loved that. In terms of, I worked with child soldiers when I was at NYU in reintegrating them in New York City with International Rescue Committee. I work on governance issues and groups of reconciliation groups in Rwanda and a few in Afghanistan. I worked on conditional cash transfers in Haiti. I worked at the African Development Bank on environmental and social safeguards while in Tunis. It's just everything from across the span of it, and I've learned so much from every single little thing. I've learned something, and it's getting more difficult because now I'm thinking of going back to school. At which point you do have to specialize.
Oh my God!
But that is what was incredible about the World Bank, and what I have enjoyed thus far is that it's an institution where every single subject you could possibly think of is probably touched upon. Maybe not as much in depth as you would like it to be. So if you want to work precisely on food policy issues and nothing else, IFPRI may be your place to be. If you want to do pure development operational projects and have the means to do it, USAID may be the place to do it. But if you want to be working on governance issues, or you want to work on energy projects, but for some reason you really are interested in knowing about social protection programs and what social safety nets are doing, or learning about how they're using gender in some operational projects to basically ensure income growth, long-term or short-term, and then also be able to go to a presentation by your colleagues about research that they're doing to basically analyze income growth and then different, all the economic analysis you could think of in the world, or basically anything that you could possibly think of. You can do your work from 9 to 12, and then from 12 to 2 you can go and meet some of the world's greatest experts on food policy, giving a presentation in one of the rooms, and then go back to work until 5, and then downstairs you have the Youth African Summit cocktail, because the White House is right next door, and we all work together. And so basically what I'm saying is that you are exposed to everything under the sun, and you get to not only learn more constantly, that is, you have a constant re-education at the bank, and then on top of that, you get to reinvent yourself if that is what you want to do. So let's say you come in working in sustainable development like I was. A couple of my colleagues were working precisely in the energy sector or the water sector. Today they might find themselves in the poverty reduction department, or infrastructure and urban resilience, or whatever else it could be. I mean, it's just, in terms of opportunities, the horizon is endless. And I think for this particular reason, that it makes it an interesting place to work. And a second reason, not just the offerings, is that you can end up where you need to be in terms of your particular skills. So if you are a private sector oriented person and you went to Stern and you really like the quant stuff and you need that in your life, you can work for the IFC.
Sure.
You can work for the International Finance Corporation branch of the World Bank, or MIGA, which is our insurance and guarantees Australia. If you really are no operations or quant, you're a good writer, and you like to see things done from A to Z, and you like to see project cycles, you can be an operational analyst. It doesn't mean that you don't get to sort of tweak your, challenge your brain a little bit once in a while and work on these other things, or learn about the next research project and contribute a bit, or attend the next concept node review meeting where they talk about how they're expanding economic models to include climate change. It's all possible and available to you. You just have to get in.
Last couple sentences?
Yeah, hey, the world is your oyster. There's a lot out there. Washington is obvious. Frankly, I don't love Washington that much because it gets just a little bit icky sometimes, and it's just, all the connections thing. It's tiring. But it's amazing, the stuff that you get to do here. You've got essentially the international, apparatus for the entire world. And so there are lots of opportunities. USAID is great. It's sort of on the small side, but we also have a foreign service. So I urge you folks to look at both state and USAID foreign services. There are different processes to get in, and then the work you do is quite different. But the folks, my friends who live overseas and have their families overseas, they love it. And then you are really connected too. I mean, you still deal with a lot of BS like we all do. But it is amazing to live. You could live in Dar, and raise your kids speaking Swahili, which
Sounds
sadly
like it's a
I
dream
didn't
for
do.
you.
But yeah, I know. I'm thinking back. Why do I have kids? But maybe someday I might take my family overseas, but not in the future. But I mean, I'm happy to also talk if you can get in touch with me via folks here, Michael or whatever. I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
So are we, if folks want to come down and
Where's the
look
after
at,
party?
yeah,
We're going to meet in the lobby outside.
okay.